Okay, before we get started, I thought we wait for another like 1 to 2 minutes to get people a bit more time to transition in case they want to join. I will then share my screen, and I'm not sure how that's working here, but probably what you might need to follow this talk is the GitHub repo that I set up. And I'm going to quickly share the link with you so that you can already access the material. Give me a second. Okay. Wait. Okay. Here you go. You should have yeah, perfect. That's great. Hopin doesn't make it easy to share stuff. Apparently, it's not as easy as Zoom, but it should work. So here's the link. If you want to access the material, just copy the link. I made a short URL for you to make it as easy as possible. And there you find a ShinyApp that I generated and that I kind of use as a example for this class. And you also find the material there. There is a folder called CorrelCon 2020 material, something like that. And I would just recommend to download the entire folder. There's a button that says download zip file, and I would go for that one. It should also be, yeah, I'm just doing that. I'm sharing the link with you here. So here you go. That should work. You should be able to copy paste that. Not sure how it's in Hopin, but it's like sometimes it works in Zoom, and I just do hope that it also works here. If not, just let me know. Great, thank you. Perfect. Okay. You do have the link in the chat, so you can copy it there, download the entire zip file, so the entire repository that I linked there. And we'll just get started with the talk. So welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure talking this wonderful sunny Saturday afternoon about Shiny. And I will experience that I had when generating my ShinyApp. And I will kind of walk you through the most important steps that you need to know to generate your own one or to create your own ShinyApp. And we will do that with shinydashboards. It's because I think like the more complex your apps get, the better it is. And I think like the difference between a normal Shiny app and a Shiny dashboard is not so big. So I think it's worth learning it in the beginning, but I will also show you the difference between both. So in case you want to generate your own like simple Shiny app, it also totally works with Shiny apps. So this is just as a disclaimer. And then before we get started, a few words about me. So I do my PhD at the University of Mannheim. I'm a conflict researcher, and you will see that in a second once I show you the app. I'm co-founder and co-editor of a data science blog called Method Bytes, which is a really, I mean, I do have to say that because I kind of contribute to that one, which is a really, really cool blog because it gives you in-depth tutorials on a diversity of topics. So if you ever want to generate your own R package and hopefully successfully publish it on CRAN, this is something that you can find there. Or if you are interested in data visualization or text mining or Bayesian stats or whatsoever, we do have to like really in-depth tutorials there. And talking about packages, I also, together with a friend, wrote and maintain a R package, which is also on CRAN. It's called Overview R. So in case you are one of these people that work comparatively, where you have to compare like large sample sizes and you want to get some kind of in-depth information about your sample, overview art could be something to go for. I'll just quickly check where we are. Okay, perfect. It's like I just can either like change the slides or CUs. So this is kind of a lagging thing probably that we're gonna encounter during the session. Okay. Okay, so for those of you who just joined Hopin or this session, here is the link again. It's also posted in the channel, in the chat. So if you want to access the material that I'm using today, it's all in this GitHub repository, and I do recommend to download the entire GitHub repository. So there's a green button that says download zip file or something like that, and I would just go with that because then you have all the material at hand. But there's in fact one particular folder which is called CorrelCon 2020 material or something similar that I generated there, and there's all the material that you need for today. In case you cannot download it or cannot access it, it's also totally fine. I will walk you through the steps and you can just follow on your screen. That also totally works. Okay. So why should you learn Shiny, or put a bit differently, why is there such a huge interest in learning Shiny? Well, if you look at these Google search trends that I got for you, you do see there's a steady increase in Google searches that look for R and Shiny. And this is actually because of a pretty good reason. So data visualization and data storytelling is getting more and more on vogue. People really try to convey their stories with what they have at hand. And if you come from research, from academia, as I do, kind of delivering your story that you have is really difficult. Because you do have these fancy models in the background that do all the cool stuff, but you probably want to tell this to a broader audience. You want to make your results accessible as possible. And I argue that Shiny is a really, really cool tool for that. So it allows what I call interactive science, but it does so much more. So in the end, I'm going to show you a couple of other examples what you can do with Shiny, and you're going to see that the variety of topics that you can cover with Shiny apps is so broad and so large that you cannot capture it in one short talk. And besides this kind of functionality that Shiny brings with it, is that it's a good-looking, low-cost tool that allows you to generate these super fancy-looking web applications. And we do have the Shiny framework that is for R. And what I put here, kind of the good news is, as long as you know some R, you can super easily build a Shiny application yourself. In fact, I once joined a meetup meeting where they kind of tried to generate their own Shiny app, and they didn't really know what they were doing. So it was really fun seeing what they were doing, because it was so interesting to see that Shiny itself is so intuitive, and they had an app up and running like after an hour, which is like really astonishing given the fact that they have never ever done that before. So this is kind of one of the go-to goals for this course, and I'm sure we're going to accomplish that. So I want you to have your very first small Shiny app up and running throughout this session, and to kind of get the basic idea of what is going on there and how you could possibly extend the app later on. So this is the Shiny app that I wanted to show you. I think if I open that now, I think because I just shared this one tab, I have to switch it again. But you could probably, can you give me just can you give me a quick feedback if you see the app, how it's opened, or do you still see the screen of the slide? Okay, perfect. Oh, well, not so perfect. I'm just gonna share, just gonna share the other tab. This is kind of the downside of Hopin. Okay, so here's the app. You should see it looks pretty much the same as the slide, but it's the app, and you're gonna see that in a second. So this is the one that I built. It's based on a publication that I have written with a colleague, and we were interested in conflict elections. So we were interested in elections that happen during conflicts, which sounds kind of counterintuitive for it, but we do have that in Syria. I mean, in particular, if you have a civil war that is really long-lasting, you probably don't want to stop elections, because also civil wars, even though they happen in a country, they don't happen in all the places of the country. They might happen just in specific regions. So if you look, for example, at the Democratic Republic of the Congo, there are some regions that are more conflict intensive and others that are like not. And kind of the same is with Afghanistan. So they had elections, I think in 2015, which were the very first elections after a really long time of having no elections. And then they had another round of elections in 2019. And I wanted to know if the findings kind of still hold that we got for the 2015 election. And I just wanted to honestly try the ShinyApp out. So this is what you see here. You do see Afghanistan. You do see the single districts with the names here, and you do see points. And these points give you the number of fatalities, so how many people died in this specific spot. And the larger the circle gets, the more fatalities there are. And you do see that there is a date, which is April 2019. So what you see is, if you select on the left-hand side, you can select different time periods. And that's on the, based on the original publication that we had. And once we select all 7 dates that are possible, because we were looking at the violence, how this kind of shifts up until the election date, you do see that you have a slider down here. And this slider, you can also play autoplay, kind of symbolizes the months. So 4 is April, 5 is May, June is 6, and so on and so forth, because the election was in September. And what you see is all these things, like the slider is connected to the map is connected to the bar charts, and all these 3 things work together, which is really like, if you would try to do that differently, at least based on my experience, it can easily become super difficult. So I was really astonished how easily ShinyApps can do that. And you can also, there are different types of selection menus that you can have. You can also select different types of violence. You can select whatever, there can be violence against civilians, there can be explosions. And what you do see is, once there appear more types of violence, once you select them, you also do have more bubbles in the map, and the color of the bubble also resonates to the color of the bar plot. And with the ShinyApp, you can not only have one tab, and this is kind of the advantage of a Shiny dashboard, because it allows you to have multiple tabs. So I generated another tab, which I called Table. Apparently my internet connection is not so fast. Which I call Table, where you can get detailed information from the data set in there based on the selections that you took or that you made on the left-hand side. So if I changed or deselected these types of violence, here you would only then have battles, but you still get the, if you're interested in these things, you get more information on the location, the fatality number, the different actors that are in place, and some additional notes. And you can also, it does not only have to be tables or maps that you can use or generate with the ShinyApp. You can also have some kind of general information, or if you want to link to the GitHub repo, which is also always good style, you can also do that. So this is so far for this app. We're not gonna build exactly the very same app, because that would simply take way too long. but I'm kind of walking you through the single steps that you necessarily need to build this app. And the graphical visualization is based on eCharts for R, which is pretty similar to ggplot, which some of you may know, but it just looks so much better, and it has some really cool functionality that ggplot does not really have. But I'm going to tell you more about that in a couple of minutes. Okay, so what do you need for setting up a Shiny app like that? Well, I used, as I said before, RStudio, then you need Shiny, obviously, and the symbol in the lower part, eCharts for R, is the graphical visualization package that I used. It's basically a wrapper around the eCharts for eCharts JavaScript library. That's, yeah, how you could say that. And then for setting up a Shiny app in R, it's actually pretty simple. You only need 3 basic components, and these 3 basic components are the UI, which is kind of the user interface, and you can think of that as the body of your app. So it's kind of the appearance. So how do you want to have things? Where do you want to have them? Do you want to have the plot in the center, in the bottom? What do you want to have in your left-hand side for the selection and these things? And then you have the server, which is kind of the brain of your app, because it does all the calculation. So when you generate a ggplot, for example, in R, you usually write some code, right? And then you get the plot out of it. And this code that produces the server is put in, that produces the plot is put in the server, sorry. So this is kind of the brain of your app. And then you do have a simple command. It's called ShinyApp, and it combines the user interface, so the body, and the server, which is the brain, and brings your Shiny app together and up and running. And that's it, basically. So it's actually really, really simple, but with astonishing results. And then there's another thing in Shiny. The programming in Shiny is reactive, and we're going to talk about that a bit later, because this kind of generates, it's not a magical thing that happens there, but it kind of generates an illusion that it's really constantly updating itself while it's not. But we're going to talk about that in a second. And if you do have any questions, I think you can also unmute yourself, or if you prefer not to do that, you can also write it in the chat. So I do have a look at the chat every now and then, and just let me know if there's anything coming up. Okay, so we start with the user interface first, which again, as I said, it kind of defines how your Shiny app looks like. You start in a object, it's called UI, and this is important. So I recommend to really call it like that. And then the Shiny app kind of starts. So you do have, if you want to have a dashboard, you do have the command, which is called dashboard page, which opens the environment where you generate your user interface. In the very first command, that's kind of pretty straightforward. You define the title, so you define how it should be called. And then in the next command, which is called dashboard sidebar, you define what you want to have in your sidebar. So you could, for example, have something, so you could have something for selecting. So I had this drop-down menu where I selected the different time periods. Or you could also have something like a choice menu where you do have multiple types of violence that you want to include. So all these things come into the select input menu. And then you do have the dashboard body menu. This is the one where you define how the body of your app should look like. So this is something where you have seen where the map is placed. So I opened a new panel or a tab. That's how they call it. It's tab panel. I called it map. So this is the name that you get up in the top. And then I placed the map there, and I placed the 2 bar plots next to the map. And then in the next tab panel, I placed the table, I included the table, and I put these, that's what they call value boxes, these little boxes, the colored boxes that you saw on the top, I placed them there as well. If I then wanted to include a description, I would open a new tab panel and place the description in there. So it's pretty, I would say, pretty straightforward. It's just probably a lot of code in the beginning, but this is kind of the logic, how your ShinyApp user interface should look like. And if we compare that with the user interface that you have just seen, you see that the dashboard sidebar is kind of the input. It's the thing that you find on the left-hand side, and the dashboard body is kind of the output. So in the dashboard sidebar, you tell your ShinyApp which things it should select, and in the dashboard body, it then displays these things. That's what you have seen when I selected different types of violence or different time periods or whatsoever. And the cool thing is, and that's also the thing that I showed you, that once you get to the table, so once you get to the next tab panel, basically, if it's reactive, if these things are connected, so if the sidebar and your tab panel is connected in some way or the other, you also get with the table, you only get the selection that you made on the sidebar. So this is, it's pretty powerful in that sense. And then in the last kind of step, you obviously do have to create your server. So for that, it's a similar logic in a way, but here you write a function. The function, you basically call it server, and the function has an input and an output. And in the single steps of the function, you kind of define all these things that should be in your ShinyApp. And even though it's kind of ordered in the logic or in the structure that the ShinyApp is built, so we do see the map first, then we do see the bar plots, and then on the next tab, we do see the table and the value boxes, it doesn't necessarily have to be in that order. Because for Shiny, it doesn't really matter where your things are, as long as you have the same things in the UI, in the user interface, and in the server. So as long as they are called the same way, if they are stored in similar or the same object name, if you want to put it like really shortly, your ShinyApp will work, no matter where you define your app, if you define it at the least step or the first step. Okay. And then in the very last step, as I said before, you do need the command, which is called ShinyApp. And in ShinyApp, you basically include your user interface and you include your server. And once you run this command, well, your app is up and running. And that's, yeah, it's pretty, it can be pretty quick and it can be already good looking at that point. So you don't have to do that much of a tweaking. But before we get to that, I kind of want to show you what reactivity is. So if we look again at the app, you should see the GIF that I generated that kind of shows you what happens if you select one thing or the other on the left sidebar. So what you see is obviously once you select one thing, bars go up and down, things change, and so on and so forth. And we're going to use this example to explain what reactivity is. I'm going to do that on a rather abstract level, but if you want to know more, there's a really great blog post by Garrett Grolemund. I linked it in one of the last slides. And he has written extensively what reactivity is, what it exactly does, and how to understand it. And I'm trying to explain that to you with this ShinyApp. But again, if you want to know more, read it. It's really recommended. So how he puts it is that reactivity creates the illusion that changes in input values automatically flow to the plots, text, and tables that use the input and cause them to update. So one way how you could think of that is that once you change one thing in the sidebar, your ShinyApp is constantly checking whether there are any updates. And it's constantly checking all these things, whether there are any updates. But that's actually not what's happening. But what's happening are that these three things, the input, the output, and the server, are connected. And I'm going to walk you through these single steps, how they are connected. So you do have the input. The input tells your app, hey, please choose battles. And then your Shiny app has chosen battles. And that's what you see in the output, which is meant to be the Shiny app with the Afghanistan map and the bar graph in a simplistic way. The beauty why it's not constantly checking all the things that are going on in your Shiny app is because you have something like a pigeon carrier. That's the example that Gary Grollemund used, and I really like that example. Because pigeon carriers, if you know that, they always come back to the place where they started flying from to deliver the post that they are, or the mail that they're meant to deliver. So the pigeon carrier will always come back to the input and to deliver the next message. So one thing that the output does, it does not constantly check the input, but instead it kind of tells the input, hey, you selected battles. Let me know once you want to update battles, and then I'm going to update battles in my output. And let's say you want to have battles and explosions, and you want to update that. So then you kind of send this pigeon carrier to the server that then, in the next step, tells the output to update it to battles and explosions. And the pigeon carrier gets back to you. So it's not a direct interaction between input and output of a constant interaction on a constant interaction level, but it's rather the server in the background that constantly, or once the pigeon carrier tells the server something, that then gets activated in the sense that it sends the message to the output that it should update itself. And then the output obviously kind of tells the input, hey, you selected battles and explosions. In case you want to select something else, let me know, and send again the pigeon carrier. So this is what reactivity in a nutshell is about. And this is kind of the illusion that it generates. So once what you have seen when I walked you through my Shiny app is it kind of feels as if it constantly checks these things while it doesn't. And because this server that is linked in the background makes this Shiny or Shiny apps in general, not just mine, but makes them really efficient, they are pretty fast for what they do. So the data set that I have in the background of my Shiny app, I'm not 100% sure, but it's on an event basis. And I probably do have, I don't know, like something like 2,000 data points or so, which is not super large, but for the for the calculation capacity that is behind that, it's pretty intense, or it's pretty impressive that it's still so fast. And that's because of the reactive programming that Shiny does for you. And with this reactive programming, there comes one other thing that I already mentioned. It doesn't really matter where your things are. So there is no sequential logic. It's not important whether your things are defined in a certain sequence, but it's event-based. And that's what I tried to show you with these arrows that I included here, is the map is both in the UI and the server, bar plots as well, the value boxes as well, and the table also. So all these things, well, in a nutshell, they need to be connected. They need to be in both parts of your Shiny app to appear, but it doesn't really matter where they are. So this already kind of leads us to our first practice session. We're gonna build the very first Shiny app after 30 minutes. If you do have any questions before, just let me know. I'm gonna quickly switch to our studio so that I can share that with you. And we do have a bit of time for questions in case there are. If not, I'm gonna continue with RStudio. Okay, I don't see any questions, so we'll just continue. Let me see. Yeah. Okay, so the file that you need to open is, wait, let me see. It's in the subfolder called material_CorrelCon_2020. And then there are 4 subfolders again, because I wanted to share all the things that you could potentially need with you. And we're going to start with the example_ShinyApp shinydashboard ggplot. So this is the important thing. And we do then have a file called app.r, and this is the one that we're going to open. And for me, it's already open. So while I give you something like a minute or so to find these things, I'm going to quickly show you how it would like if you were starting a Shiny app from scratch. So RStudio is really cool in that sense. It already comes with a nice template of a Shiny app, and that's actually the one that I started with when I generated my Shiny app. So if you select a new file you can do it with a drop-down menu, for example. You do have the option to select a Shiny web application. It's the 4th from the top. And once you select that, one important thing happens. And this is why I'm showing you that one. Yeah, you see that perfect. Yeah, sure. I'm going to repeat that in a second. Lisa, you mean where the file is, right? I'm going to repeat that in a second. I just want to quickly show you how you open a Shiny app yourself, how that looks like. So because there's one important thing. The menu lets you decide whether you want to have a single file Shiny app, which is then called app.r, or it lets you decide whether you want to have a multiple file Shiny app, which then it kind of opens 2 different files, one UI and one server file. And we do have a single file Shiny app. And this is the important thing because our app is called app.r, or our file is also called app.r, and it's necessary that it's called that way. If you obviously want to have a more complex Shiny app than the one that we have now, you obviously would go for the multiple file option. And if you then, let's say, we can call it test, for example, if you then generate the Shiny app, you already do have a template with the Shiny app in it that you theoretically can just run if you want. Then it runs the entire commands. I just executed all the lines that are in the Shiny app, and you already do have a Shiny app that plots a histogram. So this is kind of a good working example, I think, to go through the single steps that you could need for a simple Shiny app if you want to get started. So back to Lisa's question, how you get there. So once you've downloaded the material that is in the GitHub repository, there's a folder called Material CorrelCon. And there is a subfolder, there's a subfolder called example_ShinyApp_ShinyDashboard_ggplot. And we're doing ggplot first and eCharts4r second because that's a bit more complex. And then there is a file called app.r because we have a single file Shiny app where user interface and server is all in one thing. Did that help? I can also do it again. Okay, perfect. Okay, so again, as I said, a couple of seconds ago, we do use ggplot to generate our first Shiny app. You might need to install the dependencies here if you don't already have them. I will just execute that and load them. And while you can try to do the same, and possibly reinstall them or install them if you haven't done so, I will tell you what these single dependencies are about. So first, we obviously have to load the Shiny web application framework because we want to work in a Shiny environment, so we need to load Shiny. Then in the next step, I load the Shiny dashboard, which helps me to generate a dashboard. It's just once you have more complex apps, as I said in the beginning, dashboards are so handy when it comes to arranging stuff in your app. So you can really tell your dashboard, like with a Shiny dashboard, you can really tell your app where things should be located. Well, it's way more complex in Shiny apps. At least that was my experience. And then you obviously load ggplot, which is for plotting. And then we do need mgriddr because I want to have the pipe operator, which we use also in dplyr. And we load dplyr, which is part of the tidyverse and which we use for data manipulation, basically. So far, so good. So for those of you who follow me with the R file, did it work with the packages? Are you all on the same page or do you need another second? I will just continue talking about the last package that we need. It's the one with the Palmer penguins. That's if you follow this Tidy Tuesday people on Twitter, you have seen that 100% sure because it was in one of the last Tidy Tuesdays, or last probably 2 months ago. So it's a package about penguins, and it's about the weight of the penguins, the size of the penguins. So it just has some basic information about penguins in it. And we're going to use that one to generate a simple scatter plot. So in the very first step, we define our user interface, as I said before. I'm just going to go down a bit. So line 21 until 45 is all about the user interface. And if you remember, like from what I talked about, like probably 20 minutes ago, in the very, very first step, you open your user interface with the dashboard page. And then in the next step, you kind of give it your application title. So we want to have our application called Penguins. I think with the conflict elections, I probably called it conflict elections. Then in the next step, we generate the sidebar. So if you look at the code that I wrote for the conflict election ShinyApp, which is way longer and way more intense when it comes to coding or when it comes to writing lines of code, it's not always the same. It still follows the very, very same logic and the very same structure. So you do have in the next step here, the dashboard sidebar. And what we want to have is we want to have a checkbox. So we want to have, as I had that for the types of violence where you could check different types of violence, we want to have something like that here. And then we do one thing that is important. We give it a key. So this key is called penguin type. And we're going to use that later in the server to connect our user interface and the server, and to let our server know that it should take this input and do something with it at a certain place in the server. So this key is important. We call it penguin type. Then we do have a headline or a title because we want to give our users some information what they should do. And H4 basically stands for the type of headline that we have. So like which kind of hierarchy this headline had. And we're going to let our users know that it should select a penguin species. And we also give the user a list of choices. And these are the 3 types of penguin species the app comes with. So it's Adelaide, Chinstrap, and Gentoo. And we're so nice and pre-select one, because if we don't do that, our Shiny app doesn't show anything. So it's always nice to start with something off in the very beginning. And that's what we do with the selected, and we select Adelaide. And then in the very last step, we plot our plot. And the plot is called penguins, and that's another key that we use in the server, and you're going to see that in a second. And to plot the plot, we use the command plot output basically, and then we plot our penguins plot. Okay, and we do that obviously in the body, so in the large main part of our ShinyApp. Any questions on how to, or on the user interface so far? I will always look at the chat every now and then. If there's something popping up, just let me know. If not, like for the moment, I'm gonna continue with the server, which is actually not so much more longer. Like it's kind of the same length, because you see down here in line 79, it's already like bringing everything together and having your app up and running. So in the server, we first store it in the output server, and we do have a function, and the function takes 2 arguments, and it's the input argument and the output argument. And within the server, we define our plot, and this part where we define the plot is this entire part. It's from line 52 to 75. And what you see here is we store it in an object called server and attach called output, sorry, and attach the penguins to it. And this penguins is exactly the penguins that we use up here to plot our plot. So to render the plot, we use the pretty straightforward command called render plot. We prepare the data. You don't have to do that. I just did it because it's easier doing it that way, because we use pretty much the same command for the eCharts4R to make it as similar as possible. So in a nutshell, what we do here is we do have our data, like the data set penguins, which we loaded in the beginning, which is in the package penguins, or Palmer penguins, or however they call it. And through that, we use the compound pipe operator. That's how this thing is called. It's not the normal pipe operator that allows you to pipe through an object, but it's the compound pipe operator. And this basically tells you to store it again in the penguins object. So an alternative way to write it would be basically doing it like that. But because that's too long, I just use the compound pipe operator here. So it writes it back and forth, basically. That's what it tells you. And here with the compound, here with the data set, we filter through species and only select those that the input penguin type gives you. So this penguin type should be familiar to you because we just generated it up here. So whatever the user selects up here, these are the things that your ShinyApp is going to filter through, or this piping function is going to filter through eventually. And then in the last step, we generate some colors. We could also do it differently, but again, that's one thing that I just did because I'm going to do that the very same way for eCharts4R. And then we basically, once we're done with that, we filtered, we set up everything, and we can then do the plotting. And this is very much, if not exactly the same as you have it when doing it with a normal ggplot. So you do have your data set, pipe through the data set, you do have ggplot, define the X and the Y, probably define colors, define the point size, and give some meaningful lab names for the Y-axis and the X-axis. And that's it for the server. And once we have that, we do have the server and we do have the ShinyApp, and we can bring everything together and just run the command. But before we do that, we have to obviously execute the single lines. So we start with the UI, run it. Then we do the same with the server, run it. And then in the very last step, we bring it together. And then hopefully you should be seeing, I just kind of see, do you see the ShinyApp, by the way? No, you don't. This is, give me a second. I'm just gonna try it differently. Let's do it that way. Okay, so this is the ShinyApp that you should see now. Wait, I'm bringing this in front and that in front. Okay, so here we go. Hopin is not really intuitive when it comes to screen sharing. Okay, so here you have it. So these are all the things that we defined beforehand. You do have a normal ggplot, which is okay-ish in its looking. You do have obviously x-axis, y-axis, labs and everything. And the beauty comes here. You do have the selection menu. So you do have the boxes that you can tick. And once you tick them, you do see that you get more dots in here and your app does something. It adds these points or it removes them, whatever you want. And this is a Shiny dashboard ShinyApp, how it comes out of the box if you use ggplot. For the moment, this is, I would say it's pretty impressive. It's good looking. It was easy to build it, but it can be more beautiful. Obviously, we could kind of tweak the ggplot, make it more beautiful, get different colors and all these things. But there are other options how to do it in a, what I would say, more sufficient and more good looking way, namely using eCharts4R. And I'm going to tell you now. So you should see that. I'm going to tell you now in a quick introduction to eCharts4R how you should use them. But before we get to that, I'm just share again only the tab, because then I can read the chat. Before we get to the eCharts4R, are there any questions on the ShinyApp or on how it works, or anything that wasn't clear, anything that you want to see again? And we're going to see another one. So for this, I can promise you that, but with the eCharts. We're going to talk about how to publicly share the ShinyApp in the, I think, one of the last slides, but I'm going to address that. That's an excellent point. Because so far you only have it locally on your machine, but probably you want to have it publicly, like I have mine, for example, to share it with everyone. There are a couple of ways, and I'm going to tell you my go-to version, but I also do have a couple of links at the end of the presentation where you have more options. Okay, but before we get there, we're gonna talk about eCharts4R. So if you want to do some interactive graphs, even more interactive than the one we just had, there are a couple of packages, and I just picked 3 of them. One is Plotly, which is actually, it used to be my kind of go-to version, probably because I only knew that one. But it's pretty close to ggplot. So I really like this JavaScript wrapper that they generated with Plotly. There's another one that's called HighCharter. It's also really nice or really good looking. And then there is eCharts4R. And the reason why I chose eCharts4R for my app is basically because I wanted to have this timeline that you saw in the app that is in the bottom. And I couldn't get it running with another app. If like, I think I would have needed to tweak a lot of things to get it running, and eCharts4R gives you a good out-of-the-box solution for that. And besides that, it's, I think, really, really good looking and a really nice visualization kit that also, even though it's slightly different, it does have a similar logic as ggplot. And But before we get there, we get there. I changed it again. So, and I'm going to tell you how similar it is to ggplot. So you do have the code on the left-hand side, which is the code that we just used to generate the scatter plot. And you do have the eCharts4R equivalent on the right-hand side, which pretty much does the same thing. And I'm going to show you where the things are located in both codes. So obviously, we do start with the data set, which is penguins. It's the same in both of them. And then we define with the ggplot, we basically define our x and our y axis. There are a couple of ways how you can write that in ggplot. But the most important difference here between both ggplot and eCharts4R is that you constantly use these pipe operators in eCharts4R, whereas you use plus signs in ggplots. So this is one of the main differences. And you always start your eCharts4R code with e_charts, similar in a way to ggplot, where you use ggplot, right? And then in the next step, you can define your scatter plot. In eCharts4R, it's called eScatter. And here you also define your x-axis in eCharts4R. And in ggplot, I just did it a bit earlier. But you can also define in ggplot here the point size, which is symbol size in eCharts4R. And then in the next step, and this is kind of what I would say the trickiest part about eCharts4R is defining colors. So whereas it's just one line of code in ggplot, at least the way that it worked for me, I always used multiple lines of code, which is not a big deal. It's just more writing and less intuitive. So here in eCharts4R, we group by the species because we want to color by the species. And then you add something called item style, and you define species, which we previously labeled with colors. That's the thing that we did in the very beginning. And then in the last step, we can label the axis, which is pretty much the same that you had for the ggplot. It's just called e_axis_labels. But so far, it's like pretty comparable, I would say. And then once you plot these two codes, kind of the comparison already tells you, I would say, which one is more beautiful. So on the left-hand side, you do see the ggplot, and on the right-hand side, you do see eCharts4R. So the ggplot one is the one that you saw previously. Obviously, we could tweak it, but just out of the box, eCharts4R already delivers you this nice appearance without even setting a new theme or something like that. And that's a bit unfair to compare it in that sense, but eCharts4R is an interactive graph itself. So when we hovered over the ggplot, for example, so when we used the mouse and went over the ggplot, there was nothing happening. And there was nothing happening in the app as well. But if you do that here, you do see that the dots get highlighted, they pop up, they get a bit bigger. And if we added some text to them, we could have added more information. And then there's also another thing. We can already now select different types of the penguin species. So we can deselect them, we can deselect all, and we can select them again. And eCharts4R also changes the X and Y limbs automatically. So it kind of adjusts it to your needs so that it fits all the representation, and it does it automatically. So just by seeing that, I would say eCharts4R is a pretty powerful tool in visualizing. It just, once you come from ggplot, it's in the beginning really counterintuitive. But yeah, that's it for this. I just see that there is a question. It's before you develop your own ShinyApp, what was your approach to present your final outcome online? Did you only present the final outcome on the ShinyApp or execute all the raw files? I'm not sure if I really understand that question. Can you specify that? You mean so I mean, I developed the ShinyApp because I wanted to make my research more approachable. I wanted to be able to communicate it a bit better with more people that are not aware of what is going on in the world, or that are not aware of data, probably. So before, you would obviously just do it. I mean, you write papers as you do in science. You probably generate a nice map. You plot the map in the paper, and that's how you would deliver your final outcome. But this doesn't really match to the second part of your question, so I think I didn't really get it. If you want to specify it, I can address that in a second later, because I think the other part doesn't really match. And how I found the most attractive interface, well, that's hard. I went for ShinyDashboards because it allows more flexibility when it comes to arranging stuff in it. But when it comes to the appearance, you can tweak a bit the CSS. You can tweak a bit all the things that are in the background. But I do have a list of a couple of go-to possibilities that you can have a look at. And they're on the, I think, second to last slide. So you can look at them. There are a couple of themes that you can use. There are a couple of like different things that you can use. But it's really like finding the right interface and the most attractive one. Also, when it comes to aesthetical components, is really hard, and you have to play around with that. But I'm gonna, I think I'm gonna address a couple of these questions later on. Yeah, Maya, you're right. What I did is absolutely right. So I wanted to show you how these two plotting or visualization tools look like out of the box. And when I first generated it, I used the same color for both. So they were looking pretty much the same. And ggplot looked more beautiful here. And I didn't want to downgrade ggplot here, but I wanted to give you its purest sense. So I wanted to give you what ggplot does without anything, any tweaking, any changing. And I did very much the same for eCharts4R. I think I said that like differently a couple of seconds ago. So you're not missing anything. That was me not being super precise here. But this is how ggplot and eCharts4R look out of the box without any changing, without any color specification, anything. Yep. Perfect. Okay. So the next session is going to be kind of another practice session where we do the very same ShinyApp that we just did before, but we do it by adding eCharts4R, and I'm going to show you that in my R. So what you need for this is obviously, I mean, I kind of try to give it meaningful names. You need the app.r file that is in the example _ShinyApp _ShinyDashboard _eCharts4R. And there's, again, as I said before, the app file, and you need to open that one. Let me see. Okay. And once you're there, there's only one slight change that you have to do, or that I have done for you. You need to load the package eCharts4R. So you probably have to install it first. And then we can run all this code again and load all the libraries, just to make sure that they're all there. I mean, everything except of eCharts4R should be there, but still. And then, and it feels a bit redundant in a way, because you kind of do the very same things all over again. But I still think this kind of shows you how easy and approachable Shiny apps can be. So what you have here is you have, again, the user interface. Again, all the very same steps, except of one little thing that is different. And this one is this here. It's called eCharts4R output. And this is the one that generates the eCharts4R output. If we go back to the app that we had before and look at the very same line, namely line 44, for ggplot, it was plot output. But for eCharts4R, it's eCharts4R output. And this is one thing, and I'm just stressing it so much because I tend to forget that there are differences. And when I generated my ShinyApp, I started off with, I think it was Leaflet, which is another interactive tool that you can use to plot maps. I started off with that one, and I forgot to change it, and it just didn't work, and I didn't know why. So whenever you change tools, so whenever you go from ggplot to eCharts or to another like visualization tool, you need to remember that there are different commands. You can always look them up online. There are like many pages, and I also linked a couple of them in the end, but this is important. So what we do is we just run these lines of code here, and we then obviously have the very same thing for eCharts4R, but again here we do have a different command. It's called render eCharts4R, and if you remember in the old ShinyApp, I'm just switching here, line 52 as well, it's called render plots. So coming from render plots to render eCharts4R, this is what gives you the eCharts4R graph. Then we do have this preparation thing here. We do generate these things. And then in the end, we do use the command that I just showed you, where we have our data set. Here I grouped by year because I wanted to show you how the timeline works. But we could also group by species, which also works totally fine. Then we do have eCharts. So this is kind of this opening command that eCharts uses. We define our x-axis, our y-axis, and then we do have an option which makes it so simple to plot the timeline. It's simply timeline equals true. I'm so grateful for the eCharts4R guys or girls, or whoever wrote that, that they implemented that because it was kind of a lifesaver. I tried tweaking this. I don't know what it was, but I remember that I tried tweaking a lot of things to get a timeline working, and it just didn't work. And then I discovered eCharts. So this is a really short code, and it does a lot of things. Well, and then you define your x-axis, the symbol size, you add the color, and you add your axis labels. We can also run that. And then we can run the ShinyApp. And then we do have it. Well, wait, you don't see it again because I just shared R, but I'm going to share my entire screen. I keep forgetting that. Entire screen, yes, here we go. Give me a second. Here. So what you see is pretty similar ShinyApp here, but I would argue it's a bit more beautiful. I mean, obviously we could decrease the point size in ggplot and to make it a bit smoother, to make it as small as here. Obviously the relational point sizes in ggplot and eCharts4R are not the same, but what you have this beautiful timeline down here. The downside of the timeline in a way is that it only takes, I think it only takes numeric values. So this is why my ShinyApp, for example, I only have like, oh no, it only takes the order of numeric values. You can also add categories, like we could also add elderly, chinstep, and gintu, for example. But then the order is kind of messed up. It doesn't really have an order, or it goes alphabetically or something like that. So this wouldn't really make sense for the month, right? So this is why I went with the numeric versions of the month. This is kind of a downside that I couldn't solve so far. And then at some point I was, okay, it's fine. But besides of that, the timeline is great. Okay, going back to the to the talk, to the slides. This is basically what eCharts4R kind of does to your app. And all that I wanted to show you with that is that it can be so simple to just add a bit of code and you get a so much more beautiful picture out there. And then what I also mentioned a couple of minutes ago is that I used Leaflet in the beginning. These are all 3 tools, how you can plot interactive figures and more importantly also interactive maps, because that's the thing I was interested in. So you can either, and I just wanted to give you kind of a brief overview because I spend a lot of time thinking which one is best and to compare them. So I started off with Leaflet, which is in the middle, and because it's really, really easy and accessible if you want to have interactive maps. And if you see, like nowadays, you see plenty of maps online, in particular with the coronavirus and so on. And you often see in one of the corners that they use Leaflet, in fact. So this is pretty funny if you see it again and again in all these plots or in all these maps. And then the other one is obviously Plotly, which is a wrapper around ggplots objects in a super abstract speaking way. And it also plots maps kind of well, but it doesn't have the timeline that I wanted to have. And it's not as good and simple and plain and minimalistic looking, at least not in my opinion, as eCharts4R. And then you do have eCharts4R, which kind of gives you this great tool great look out of the box. And it also works really good on mobile devices, which is kind of a pro if you think of how many people would open your app on a phone instead of a computer, probably, depending on which kind of app you want to design, right? But it's kind of more difficult to customize. So figuring out how to change colors was, in the beginning at least, pretty painful, because coming from a ggplot environment where things seem to be logical because you're used to it, this is kind of more counterintuitive. So what I thought is, if you're used to ggplot, Plotly might be more accessible, but it's not so much of a deal to kind of change to eCharts4R. And you're going to see more and more graphs coming up with eCharts4R these days. So more and more people give it a try. So it's really worth trying it out. And then I do have a couple of lessons learned. And I think I'm going to address a couple of the questions that came up in the chat before in here, because these are all things that I kind of wished someone would have told me before starting off. I wouldn't give this talk here if I wouldn't believe in it in a way, right? So ShinyApps are a powerful tool. They are great. They are easily accessible. They are easily implementable. As I said in the beginning, these people that didn't know Shiny at all, they got an app up and running themselves in an hour. And this is like really impressive. Obviously, you do, like, the more you add, the more difficult it gets and the more problems you encounter. But it's kind of a fun experience in a way, because there's always a solution to these things that you encounter. And the result is kind of rewarding in that sense. But things that I would recommend if you want to start off with your own Shiny app is to start off really simple. So I would use the most basic example that you can find and build up on that example. So one thing that I did in the beginning, and I did it totally wrong, I was probably, because I thought, okay, my Shiny app should be something that actually a couple of people should be doing the same way, or should have thought of doing the same way. So I could just take a template from someone else and add the stuff that I have. So doing it as every, like, good or bad coder does, right? So I was looking for a really cool example that had all these features in there, but there was none. So I started off with a super complicated example that in the end made things even worse for me, because there were some errors popping up and some things weren't working the way I wanted them to be. And then I went back and started really simple. I had this ShinyApp that they offer you once you open a ShinyApp in RStudio, as I showed you in the beginning. I had this template, and I just started off with that one, and that's what I would recommend to you. And then another thing I would recommend to do it doesn't have to be handwritten, but whatever, I would recommend to do a concept of your app, meaning just make your mind up and think of what you want to include and where you want to include it. Because once you start looking up stuff with Shiny apps, there's so many things out there, and there's so many possibilities that you can have a look at, and that you can integrate. So it becomes like an endless endless trajectory, endless path, endless journey in a way. And this kind of handwritten concept kind of tells you, okay, this is where I want to go. And it kind of helps you also to make your mind up. Then the other thing that I encountered is that the order of the workflow might be a bit counterintuitive. So when I started off, I was like, why should I define how my app should look like first before even knowing whether the server, like the body, the brain really works? So it's kind of the app as it's written in itself. If you use the single file Shiny app, is you obviously define the user interface first and then the server second. But if you write it, it's kind of a back and forth process. And this is kind of, if you come from a sequential code logic, this is kind of counterintuitive. Well, and then one thing that is actually, I mean, I stressed it a couple of times, but sliders for timelines are difficult in Shiny apps, and download buttons as well. And both are delivered and easily implemented by eCharts4R. And then I do have a really short note on deploying an app, but I do have another slide where I go more in depth in that. I do recommend shinydashboards.io, which, and I'm going to spend a bit more words on that in a second, which is really straightforward and really easy. Just the only one thing that you have to have in mind is you must not install packages directly in your Shiny app file. So install.packages should not be included in your Shiny app file, but only the library command. But that's it. And of course, you have to install them beforehand, but it must not be installed directly in the file. That's the only thing that you have to keep in mind when it comes to shinydashboards.io. Okay. And then before getting there, I wanted to spend kind of 2 seconds on how to arrange your Shiny app, or what the difference is between this Shiny dashboard that we used and the classical Shiny app. And I think it kind of addresses the question with the most attractive interface in a way, if not just clarify the question. I'm gonna try to answer that one. So what you see here on the left-hand side is the classical Shiny app, and it's very much the same eCharts4R Shiny app with the penguins. And this one is kind of, when you write it, it feels less complex, and it's really good for simple Shiny apps. So if you were just to present this one plot, totally fine. Go with the classic Shiny app. But if you want to have it more complex, if you want to have tabs, if you want to have more options, I would always recommend to go with the Shiny dashboard, because I started off with the Shiny app and then rewrote my entire code for the Shiny dashboard, which is not so much of a deal, but some things change and this can be tedious. So yeah, I think if I could go back in time and tell my past me again, I would probably start off with the Shiny dashboard at first, because your app always becomes bigger than you expect it to be. And this is, yeah, I mean, I put down some points. It's like a really cool out-of-the-box tool. It's also mobile ready, which is, again, really important in some cases. It helps you to arrange these single components, and it makes larger apps with more components and more content, more tabs, and all these things easier accessible. And to kind of show you what the difference between these two is when it comes to code, I put down the code for both. So what you see is it's pretty much the same. It just like you do have different names. You have the fluid page, which is a fluid page that adjusts automatically. And here it's called dashboard page. Then you do have the title. Here it's called dashboard header for the Shiny dashboard. You have the sidebar, which is here defined in sidebar panel. And then you have the dashboard body, which is the main body, which is in the classic Shiny app called main panel. In the non-classic Shiny dashboard, Shiny app, it's called dashboard body. So it's not really much of a big deal. It's not much of a big difference. But yeah, I would still always go with the Shiny dashboard. And then as a kind of almost last thing, how can you deploy your Shiny app? Well, as I said before, my kind of go-to solution is shinydashboards.io. I deployed, I think, 2 or 3 Shiny apps there, and it's really easy. They do have a free tier where you can upload your Shiny app. It has certain capacity restrictions. So I think people can only access it so and so many times per month, something like that. And if you go over, like beyond this time capacity that you have for free, it just stops automatically and it's just not like accessible anymore. But I mean, this is not saying that my Shiny app, I'm just thinking of how to put it. Anyway, so I never ever reached that capacity. So, or at least I'm not aware of that, and no one ever complained. So it probably means that my Shiny app is not as requested as it could be. But for me, that's totally fine. But if you want to have like more time capacity to access stuff, there are also paid plans that they have. The only downside, I mean, it's always the thing when you probably work with the sensitive data and you want to share the content with the sensitive data, Shiny apps probably might, or there's a typo, I just see that. It's not iOS, it's IO. It's shinyapp.io or shinyapps.io, something like that. But there's a link behind that and that definitely works. So anyways, if you want to deploy a Shiny app with sensitive data, that's probably not the best way to go. You can also deploy it locally on your own server if you know how to do that. And I'm pretty sure there are multiple guidelines online, as there are always. But for me, like shinyappps.io, always like that worked, and that works really easily. There are basically like 4 to 5 steps that you have to follow. And I also put you that guideline in one of the very last slides so that you can access that. It's just like one very, very important thing, and I mentioned that before. You just need to make sure that all dependencies are installed, because otherwise it's gonna crash. And then you basically do the following steps. You install rsconnect, which is a package. You sign up for your own shinyappps.io account, and you can use this free tier. And then I would go with method 1. It's it basically, there's a link behind this here. If you have the slides, you can click on that. But basically, it describes you how to get a token. And once you get the token, there's also a command, an R command that you can just copy and paste it to your RStudio, and that's it. Then your RStudio is connected to your shinyappps.io account, and you can upload and push your Shiny app. It's kind of in a way like connecting your RStudio with GitHub. It's not much different. And then you can test your Shiny app with run app, or you can already deploy it with deploy app. And that's it. And then your app is basically up and running. And you can access it. It has a couple of statistics behind it. You can do all these different things and get more information on how heavily requested your Shiny app is and all this stuff, and monitor it. But this is probably the way I would go. But for more sensitive data, there you should think of a different option, like hosting it yourself, or like asking IT people at wherever you work or wherever you want to deploy it. And Before we kind of conclude this, I wanted to show you what else can you do with the Shiny, because as I said in the beginning, it's a really powerful tool. It has lots of diversity. I mean, you can deploy apps, you can deploy scatter plots, but you can also do different and other like really meaningful things. I'm not saying that the others are not meaningful, but differently meaningful. So what you could, for example, do, and that's what a friend of mine did, she visualized the Scottish household survey for the Scottish household, or for the Scottish government. She visualized it with a ShinyApp. So what she did here is basically she made this huge household survey accessible to so many people so that they can easily probably generate reports or get an access to the data and see how things developed over time, how responses developed over time. And you can think of any kind of data set that you have in mind that you could possibly visualize here. Or if you're in science, for example, we tend to have, or I tend to have long appendices with a couple of robustness tests, couple of tests that I do on all these things to make sure that my results are as robust as possible. And these things oftentimes end up in PDF files somewhere, wherever, and no one is probably going to access them. But what you can do is you can generate a ShinyApp interactive appendix to make also your results possibly more accessible, where you allow people to kind of plot stuff or to do some simulations like for different scenarios and these things. So these are things that you see more and more that people are doing that. Then there's another thing that's something that I did with a friend for a hackathon, actually. So we wanted to see if we could build a search engine. And it was one of these Corona hackathons where people try to find a solution. And we thought we'd do what we can do best, reading or skimming scientific articles. And we built actually a search engine that helps you to filter it's more than 20,000 articles for relevant and associated keywords. So the article itself, or based on the authors that wrote the article. And the user can, this type of search engine, it doesn't have to be for scientific articles, but it can be for anything. I saw one that shows you kind of your career trajectory. Once you can different paths of your trajectory, and it kind of shows you alternatives, ways other people went after being placed in this and that position. So there are multiple kind of search engines that you can build with these Shiny apps. Or what I also use quite regularly is, I mean, coming from a science background, these examples might be really heavy on the science side. But when I do my syllabi, I often or always try to check whether there's a gender balance in the literature. And you're often kind of astonished how little gender balance there is. And this Shiny app here, the gender balance assessment tool, kind of helps you to open the eyes how imbalanced certain literature can be. But again, as I said, this was pretty heavy on the science side, but there are multiple of other Shiny apps that people generated. And I linked you here the winner of the annual Shiny contest from RStudio and what they do, or what they did and what they do. So they use that for teaching. People use that for simulations, for example, if you want to simulate a statistical model or something like that. So there are multiple purposes how people could possibly use this Shiny app, or these Shiny apps and these powerful tools. Having said that, I think we kind of reached the end. So here are all the resources that I promised. Listed in the make the reactivity even faster. And you should think here, step-by-step guide. You can just click on these, and there are a couple of really cool tools and resources that you can access. And here are again the material if you want to have that chance about it. And I'm just just saw that people started asking questions. So if some questions, feel free to ask them. We could spend the past minute or last minutes on answering them. Sure, I think that should be. I never so ask whether it's possible to use Shiny as also to store user input. That's possible. I'm not myself, to be honest. So I'm not sure. I do think it's possible. The only thing that I do see at the first glance as a side kind of that, the intention where do you store your Shiny app? So where you host it, where you deploy it, because when it comes to GDPR, information is the best of long European Union. And generally speaking, it should be possible. Just thinking of another. So also that was really fun. It was for a conference where people gave you generate your own badge, Shiny app, and this basically was you, and then it converted it into a good-looking badge. So and you could download that thing. So there are multiple options how you could use it, but I think, at least not that I'm aware of, I have never seen that that you could store the input somewhere, but I'm 100% sure that's possible. Yeah. I will wait another minute in case there are more questions. If not, I would say we could call it a day. I'm not sure if I answered, if Husop Shin, not sure if I pronounced your name correctly. I'm sorry for that. My name gets butchered all the time, so if I did that, I'm really sorry. I feel you. I'm not sure if I answered your question before correct, the way you intended it to have, or if I understood it the way you wanted to post it. If you're still here and if I didn't, just let me know. If not, you can also contact me and I can try to clarify stuff. Okay, I think then there are no more questions coming. I hope that was helpful, and I hope it kind of gave you a good insight into how easily you can build your own Shiny app. If you do have any questions, there are my contact details. Just drop me an email or write me on Twitter or whatever, and I will try to help with that. If not, I would say we could close the session here. I will stop sharing my screen and I will leave the floor to the next presenter. And yeah, I do hope you learned a lot. And if that was the case, my mission for this afternoon is kind of accomplished. That's perfect. Okay, thank you.